While Venice's founding myth claims La Serenissima arose suddenly out of the sea, much like Venus's miraculous birth, in reality, its history was rooted in the terra firma and the Romans who sought refuge from the barbarian migrations that ravaged Italy during the 5th and 6th centuries. In the face of this acute crisis, urban centers such as Aquileia, Concordia, and Altino were abandoned as its inhabitants retreated to the safety afforded by the islands in the lagoon. Torcello's history begins after the Bishop of Altino had a vision that his flock should relocate to the safe isolation of the island, and it was subsequently afforded the distinct status as the region's new episcopal seat. Shortly after their forced exodus, Bishop Mauro oversaw the construction of Torcello's new cathedral, which began in 639. The foundation stone, still visible in the church today, confirms his patronage and the terminus antiquem for this first phase of construction. The church followed a typical early basilican plan, with a nave and side aisles terminating in a semicircular apse flanked by smaller absidioles. Construction of an adjacent octagonal baptistry also commenced at this time. Based on archaeological data and our own site survey, we have been able to produce this model of the 7th century church before it was architecturally modified by later alterations. As you can see, Torcello's cathedral adhered to a typical Venetian Byzantine aesthetic, with an understated brick exterior punctuated by pilasters and windows at 2 levels on the southern wall. The plan accommodated the early Christian liturgy, which dictated that neophytes be baptized before entering the sacred space of the church. Catechumens would enter the structure from the southwestern door and undergo the baptismal ritual. The eastern door, from which they would exit, allowed for direct access into the nave and the Christian sacraments now available to them. Although little remains of this original structure, other than the lower part of the western facade and the baptistry's stone foundation, our model captures the original design, its aesthetic, and the ritual topography of the sacred 7th century site. As Torcello's position as a social, religious, and economic center within the lagoon increased, 9th century additions to its cathedral reflected this evolving status. Under the direction of Bishops Adeodato I and II, the interior was decorated with imported marbles, and a synthronon was added to the apse. These architectonic modifications emphasized the significance of the cathedral and made explicit Torcello's importance as the literal and figurative seat of the bishop's power. Furthermore, a subterranean annular crypt was constructed below the apse, which adhered to similar trends initiated in Rome at the beginning of the century. The relics of Saint Heliodorus, Altino's first martyred bishop, were interred below the altar, thus creating a vertical axis of sanctity that connected the current bishop with the origins of episcopal authority. The addition of a portico to the west facade enhanced the building's aesthetics and physically linked the baptistry to the church. More importantly, it functioned as a liminal threshold that gave physical expression to the separation of sacred and secular space. Torcello reached its cultural and economic zenith during the 11th century. Boasting a population of over 10,000, its fame as a trade epicenter reached as far as Byzantium. In his letters, the Emperor Constantine VII described Torcello as a great emporium. Torcello's prosperity coincided with larger trends across the Venetian lagoon, which was similarly flourishing under the rule of Doge Pietro Orseolo II. The island had an intimate link to the Doge, as Pietro's son Orso oversaw the final building campaign of the cathedral. Beginning in 1008, the original mosaic floor was raised 30 centimeters and repaved with Cosmati tilework. 18 new columns were installed along the nave arcade. The most significant alterations included increasing the height of the nave and the addition of windows to the west facade. Construction of a campanile was also begun during the period, although it collapsed multiple times throughout the following centuries. These additions and embellishments to the episcopal complex gave physical expression to the sense of identity and prestige that commercial success brought to Torcello during this period. The 12th and 13th centuries saw the addition of vivid mosaics to the central apse and western wall. These images drew from both the Byzantine and Western iconographic traditions and underscored the role of Torcello as a nexus of Mediterranean cultures. The canonical image of Christ as a symbol of salvation occupied the space above the altar, while the west wall served to remind congregants of the fate that awaited their souls after death. We see here how the monumental image of the Virgin and Child in the apse was a clear reference to the iconic Hodegetria mosaic found in Constantinople's Hagia Sophia. The 6 registers of imagery that occupy the west wall include depictions of the crucifixion, anastasis, desis, psychostasis, and scenes from heaven and hell, a sophisticated union of otherwise differing post-schismatic views of the Christian afterlife. However, the ever-evolving topography of the lagoon would soon create major obstacles for life on Torcello. The decline of Torcello began when natural erosion of the physical landscape caused navigation in this part of the lagoon to become increasingly difficult. Swamps expanded, slowly overtaking the inhabitable portions of the island. These physical transformations precipitated outbreaks of plague and malaria, which led to the abandonment of Torcello in favor of the higher ground of the Rialto. The church complex quickly fell into disrepair, and its status as an ecclesiastical center was eclipsed by that of San Marco. Already by 1346, the distant Torcello was omitted from what is the earliest known map of the Venetian lagoon. Steadily, depopulation continued. Only 20 residents remain on the island today. As we have illustrated with our project, however, Torcello was a significant church complex studded with architectural and decorative features that made explicit its wealth, power, and status in the medieval lagoon. Even today, the legacy of Torcello's vibrant history still endures in its surviving structures.